So I'm just gonna share my screen if you guys give me just 1 minute. Okay, great. Just want to make sure, Val, that you can see my screen and
Yeah.
If we're ready to start.
Yeah, we can start. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Valentina, and today we're going to present you to our research, Designing the Conversation, a co-design inquiry into neuroinclusive communication in the contemporary workplace. I'm a critical design researcher, originally from Ecuador, based in London. I use research, design tools, and facilitation to investigate broken systems, work alongside communities, and open alternative ways of thinking and doing. My work sits at the intersection of design, research, and art, using system thinking to understand why certain people keep getting left out, and inclusive design to do something about it. Now I'll pass you to my project partner.
Good afternoon to everyone present here. My name is Jasmine, and I am a design researcher from India based in London. Through my work, I've worn many hats: network designer, researcher, community facilitator, and creative strategist. My practice is currently grounded in community engagement and systems thinking, wherein I like to develop collaborative frameworks that address shared global challenges.
A quote from the book that informed us in this process says, there are people within the communities with knowledge already, or loads of knowledge who are not being lifted up. We believe that if we're really going to build power, we need to build power in the communities, which means we need to let go our ego and we need to build the power in the community, mentor or build the skills. The standard workplace was never neutral. It was designed around particular kind of mind. That being said, an inclusive workplace then is one that consciously and actively makes room for all those differences, not as an afterthought, but as a design intention from the start. But inclusion on its own isn't enough. Realizing the real benefits of diverse thinking requires generally equality, not just access, but of opportunity and outcome. Because when inclusion is assumed rather than designed, when we say everyone is welcome without actually building for everyone, differences become a disadvantage. The problem with the most workplaces are still built around one dominant communication style, and that is the case with neurotypical and neurodivergent employees process and express information differently, and that creates frequent everyday misunderstanding, which comes in meetings, in emails, in feedback conversations. The norms that govern those moments suit some people while quietly marginalizing others through culture and process. And when those small disconnections are left undressed, they accumulate and become systemic barriers that exclude people and limit their ability to advocate for themselves. According to the Quality, Diversion, and Inclusion Report, 70% of organizations name their inclusion as a critical strategic priority, signaling clear intent as the top. Yet only 38% of neurodivergent employees say their organization actually provides meaningful practical support. The gap between what organization says and what the employees experience tells us something important, that is a structural issue at its core. Following that, 37% fear stereotyping, 34% citing a stigma, and 31% have not told their manager or representative.
So from this, we identified gaps in the current research. The first is how disclosure becomes a hidden bottleneck. So a tool that requires a diagnosis to use might actually end up excluding the people who need it the most. So we thought, how might we design tools that are universal by default? The second insight is reframing accommodation as a shared communication infrastructure. So how might the tools be framed as better communication for the whole team, not just the neurodiverse people? And lastly, we look at leaning into differences, wherein how might we design to make communication look more neurodivergent, translating it both ways. Leading us to our research question. How might we reimagine communication styles between cross-neurotype employees grounded in co-design principles to promote workplace neuroinclusivity? So by cross-neurotype, we mean neurodivergent individuals and neurotype employees. And co-design is a methodology wherein the people destined to use the system play a critical role in designing it, which we will dive deeper into in the following slides. So our project A has 4 aims. First, to center the lived experiences of neurodivergent people in designing communication tools that serve the whole workplace ecosystem. The second, to reframe workplace conversations as creative collaborations. Third, to support neurodivergent individuals in advocating for their own communication needs with confidence and agency. And fourth, to design an open, accessible framework that is flexible enough to evolve with it. This project is embedded in 2 working methodologies, co-design principles, as mentioned before, as a whole, and warm data. Co-design or collaborative design is an approach to design that focuses on working with rather than for the people who will use a product, service, or system throughout its development. In a Western or global North sense, co-design has its root in participatory design practices that emerged in Scandinavia in the 1960s. But at its core, co-design reframes the relationship between designers and participants, flattening the hierarchy with the intention of leveraging insights from lived experience. So what is warm data? We understand qualitative research as intended to be open and sensitive to complexity. Nora Bateson's concept of warm data encourages us to see the bigger picture. It is not meant to replace or in any way diminish other data, but rather it is meant to keep information alive. This type of practice reminds us that understanding neurodiversity means holding space for feelings, environments, histories, and relationships. A design process involves finding as well as solving problems so that the problem and solution can co-evolve. In this project, we embed research and design practices to explore, develop, and evaluate problems and possible solutions in an iterative process.
Moving on, visual communication design is the art of conveying information through visual language, using image, text, color, symbols, and typography to inform, influence, and shape how audiences think and behave. However, meaning is co-produced. The eyes perceive, the brain interprets, and that process of reception is just as decisive as the designer's original intention. That's why the audience is not afterthought in visual communication. That's the starting point. For a neurodivergent audience, the principle doesn't just apply, it is essential. Another passage from the book, Design Justice says, Design justice means that we think about design narrative, who receive attention and credit for design work, how we frame design problems and challenges, how we scope design solution, and what stories we tell about how design processes operate. At the heart of this process, we have the opportunity to collaborate with Kata Kata. It's a deaf-led community cafe and inclusive hub in Brixton, London. They're a Black-led community organization with a strong record in co-production, inclusive engagement, and grassroots delivery. They work with deaf, neurodivergent, and disabled people. Ebago is the founder of the community and a strategist of the organization. Originally from Cameroon and being disabled himself, he has faced many challenges throughout his journey that help him expand his mind and eventually inspire him to make and create access to a wider disabled community. And that's what took us to the Neurodiverse Cafe. We conduct an interview, and the insights he shared with us were some of the most meaningful. Abigail identifies systemic and grassroots gaps from life experience. Although UK policy aims to increase employment support for disabled people, it is simultaneously tightening eligibility and reducing payments for new claimants, leaving a significant gap in hiring and clear career pathway for neurodivergent communities. Kata Kata's central goal is to demonstrate that neurodivergent individuals can work and earn independently. Before proving this, Abigail foregrounds well-being, noting that many neurodivergent people have never worked previously, so support must be recognized in every individual. A key well-being factor is worry, especially to fear of losing benefits once in work. To prevent this, Katakata collaborates closely with the stakeholders such as job centers and the Department of Work and Pension, ensuring that the support given to a neurodivergent individual is protected and not withdrawn.
So, during Abigail's experiences working with many stakeholders, he has found that it is not always the individual that needs the intervention as much as the ecosystem that surrounds it. He introduced us to the triangle. The triangle comprises of three parties: the employer, the one hiring the individual; the career supporter, organizations that help neurodiverse individuals in employment; and the carer, the person caring for the neurodiverse individual, or also the first point of contact. And centering all of this is the neurodivergent individual themselves. But herein lies the problem. A big barrier as a grassroots organization is that communication between these different stakeholders lacks. They lack the necessary tools and communication methods to speak with one another. For example, when a situation arises where a neurodivergent individual is unable to attend work, the three parties need to co-communicate and be informed. Research shows a gap between existing tools and the lack of usability and attention to it. So understanding the triangle communication flow is important since the individual themselves experience feelings of worry, like we mentioned before, about losing benefits and more. So we have identified that everyone within the ecosystem must work together towards the end goal. That is, as we've mentioned before, is to prove that the neurodivergent individual can work. In response, designing flexible, adaptable tools will allow people to communicate with one another. As Abigail states, it is not a linear process. Flexibility has to be considered during the process, active listening as well. And all this comes back to the well-being factor. Following the interview, we held our first co-designing session hosted at the Neurodiverse Cafe in London. The agenda for this session was an interactive mapping exercise called stakeholder mapping with a singular aim to understand who is involved in the problem space and how each party relates to the problem itself. As you can see, the map takes a circular form and is divided into three layers, as we called it, the onion rings. Those directly affected, those indirectly affected, and the systems affected. The directly affected include neurodivergent individuals, employees with co-occurring mental health conditions such as anxiety and depression, which are common companions to neurodivergence, and autistic adults already in employment. The indirectly affected could include human resources alongside disability, employment advisors, and workplace coaches. And the systems affected on the outer ring are understood at a broader scale, encompassing institutions and the funding systems that that shape provision. Upon analyzing the data, we found 4 insights. 1, the directly affected group holds caregivers, single parents, dependents, and more. The lived experience of neurodivergence is entangled with caregiving, precarity, and other marginalizations. Peer-to-peer communication sits in the directly affected ring, where neurodivergent people communicating with each other is a distinct and underserved channel worth designing for. The third thing we identified is bias concentrates at the point of entry and management, which confirmed what we already knew but needed stating. And lastly, that language and understanding gaps can be interpersonal and structural that responds to our research question directly, which is the need for an everyday communication tool in the workplace.
Following the stakeholder map, we move into hopes and fears, mapping to understand what collaboration actually means within this research. The exercise surface share aspirations and anxieties across the team, clarifying not only what we want to build, but what we most actively guard against. So first, what the strongest shared hope is longevity and durability beyond this project. we found the importance of work to be impactful and a toolkit that is adaptable and can build towards their inclusivity in the workplace. The ambition is a framework flexible across neurotypes, not to confine one community or one funding cycle. The defining fear is the project to program gap. Abigail mentions fear that the third parties treat this is just as projects, names the central anxiety. How does the work move from a discrete project into sustained strategic action and implementation? This echoed by fears of superficial adoption, where employers download the tool but never change practice. Community led design is about developing tools and technology along with people that's meant to serve. Thinking that tools provide silver bullets without taking the time to really understand community context is also a recipe for failure. Hashtag more than a code study participants share many stories of failed projects. Frequently, those projects jump too quickly solutions and were tool centric. Moving from the mapping sessions, we have to understand our capacity of intervention, and this is how we group all the insights. So we decided to use the high and low priority quadrant that enable us to move the sticky note through 4 different sections. Intervene and resolve, high priority likely, map it and make sense, high priority unlikely, not so urgent, address opportunistically, low priority likely, can be left aside, low priority unlikely. From the mapping sessions and conversation with Abigail, we scope one out that the ones that need intervention and resolution, which are the green post-it that you can see in the high priority and intervene and resolve, are like such as HR, human resources bias when it comes to the hiring process. The other was neurodivergent colleagues peer-to-peer to communication, a framework that is flexible to work across different neurotypes that focus on life experience, intervening with grassroots communities because they are the ones being mostly affected by opera systems, but also the ones that are doing the groundwork and change. Our next steps for this research is to conduct further interviews across the triangle, host up to 2 further co-design sessions mapping the range of communication tools currently used in workplace settings, run rapid prototyping sessions to develop the framework and tools and test how they deploy within the community, use the initial user testing as a research site for observing and redefine our co-design methodology. Thank you.
Thank you for listening and supporting our research journey. We would like to especially thank Abigail for his support through this process. We are now open to any questions you might have, and we'll try and respond as best as we can.
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving this presentation and doing the research and finding out everything. And I have a burning question immediately. How from the arts into this research? What happened? What happened in your own journey that you thought, we want to investigate this. We want to do research in this. There needs to be done something. What happened?
Well, why don't you take this and tell everyone your personal stake in this?
So I've been diagnosed with learning differences since I was 7, like very young age. And I never thought about being into this part of the research until my last project that me and Jazz, we've been collaborating over, I would say 3 years from now. So it's basically that's the pit point of the inspiration came from, of being in institutions or being in workplaces or being in systems that it's hard for some neurodivergent to accommodate into those systems. So there was so many questions that need to be asked and respond. So I think that's when our design intersect into a systemic problem, when it's like, it's basically one of the things that we put in our presentation, life experience. So when a problem becomes a life experience, that's when you start asking questions. And of course, I think Jazz as well has experience living with someone with
That's true.
disability.
And I think that more than that is I may not necessarily be neurodivergent, but I think that people who aren't need to be a part of the conversation just as well, so they can support and build alongside the people that need to be in the room. So I think that's actually one of the reasons why our partnership works in the first place, because we just complement our working styles and yeah, just sort of support one another where it's needed. And I think we both began in a creative field, and we realized that there was a desperate need for design and creative thinking to be a part of these academic and science conversations, and it brought both of our passions together to investigate, and that's how we find ourselves here.
Clear, it's a very good story. And where do you want to go? Where does it go? Where does it end? What is the dream? What is out there in the future for you too?
That's a great question. We've actually been working a lot with communities, small marginalized communities and grassroots organizations. How we work is we usually approach them, do a couple of mapping sessions, identify the struggles that they have or that the need that they might have, and then work together to collaborate on solutions that can benefit them. But it will always be at a very niche grassroots level that might work from bottom to top as opposed to top to bottom, which we find really hard. And so our approach has always been to infiltrate the bottom and hope it goes upwards. Yeah.
Cool. Valentina, do you want to share something or?
Well, it's a bit uncertain in the future, but I think we advocate a lot of what we do and how we work. I think collaboration is very important in this future. If we are speaking about like collaboration, we're always going to be able to collaborate together, either with neurodiversity, social justice, community-led projects that tackles these issues. So I think collaboration and being able to be curious and stay curious of these systemic problems and dig deeper, like Jasmine says, like starting from bottom to top. I think, like even like we said in one of the slides, it's like grassroots organizations are doing the groundwork. Those are the ones who are doing the change. So we're learning from that experience. How can we be? How can we put our how can I say, kind of like part in the world?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I understand that. And side note, I run a pretty big community, so I know what you're talking about. And one of the things that we're very proud of is that we don't have any rules, and expectations. So we put it all open there, and everything is possible. And I see immediately that that's a big difference from a lot of other communities where there is maybe a very clear goal set, but a lot of rules as well. And that closes up a lot of opportunities and possibilities. I have a question about the triangle, and then I will go to Hans, who's also asking a question. Thinking about the triangle, I'm also curious in your view on the responsibility by the neurodivergent itself. So there's the organization, there's the employer, and what can you do yourself when I can speak for myself? I'm on the spectrum, I have ADHD and I have dyslexia. So I have a responsibility as well to make it work in wherever I work. What are your findings? What are your ideas? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that goes along in the well-being factor in order for the neurodivergence. So for us, it will be helping in the well-being factor, helping these individual to basically do like being able to do the basics. But in one of like things that like we like collaborating with this organization, we realize that it's not one size fits all. So if you're helping someone, it's tailored to that specific person, to their own needs, what this person needs, what is like what they actually can do, how can we help this person. So I think it comes a lot with well-being, like even like Abigail says, we realize that collaborating with it. So yeah, it's just
I think that in terms of like, of course, completely agree with what you said, Val. I think that it also, in terms of responsibility on the individual themselves, I think that the person themselves will go about their daily life as they do, and they will live their life the way that they have envisioned. The reason behind the triangle was to also just understand the different parties within the ecosystem of a neurodivergent person who's on the higher end on the spectrum. And I think that it was about identifying these players, these people, these parties, and how we might intervene in creating a sort of easier communication flow between them so that it doesn't get tedious or difficult down the line when they are actually put into a position where they have to respond and they don't have any tools to communicate accordingly. And I think that's where the sort of research led us to in terms of identifying whether or not this would be beneficial for the neurodivergent person themselves. We actually don't know yet. One of our fears was that the tool itself would put a lot of stress on the individual themselves and they might actually step back and not want to use it. So definitely one of the goals of the project is to make sure that whatever we do design or develop will have to be tested and we'll have to see whether it works or not.
Thank you. That's clear. Hans is asking a question. Do you know some tools to make communication easier?
Yes, we did do a mapping session where we did identify current tools that exist already. I will have to find our board if you can just give me 1 minute. Unless
Yes,
anything
we
is
can do that.
coming to the top of your head, Val.
so basically the creative communication tools that already existing is translation posters, conversation cards, meeting platforms, online schedules, mapping frameworks, sensory signals, adaptation toolkits like zines, like handbooks, guidelines. So those are like already existing in the market. So how can like our projects is like, okay, how like what is already existing, but from the perspective
Yeah,
of grassroots, from the co-worker, from the job
employer.
from the employer, how can we all combine all of this inside feedback and we can actually design an alternative framework.
Because it, even though these tools exist, one of the reasons why they're underutilized is because of the user testing itself. It's too complicated, it's very difficult to understand, and it doesn't actually serve the needs of the neurodivergent individual. And so this was about finding the right, also, they might not just need one thing or one tool, they might need a multiple. So how does that fit in the ecosystem? Because I know that some organizations had a needs dashboard, but that might not, some neurodivergent people might not be happy to vocalize that they need something on such a public platform. So it is about finding the right combination of tools. And I hope that answers your question, Hans.
I think so. I think Hans is really happy with that. Final question for the both of you. Here we are. People are listening to you from all over the world in this session. Is there anything you need? Is there anything you like? Is there anything people can help you with who are listening to your presentation?
Val?
I think
Yeah, go ahead.
of course, we will always need the community of neurodiverse community for any feedback, for any kind of like designing intervention. Like I think for us designers, like feedback is really important, constructive feedback, because the more iteration, the more prototype is better. I think that's of course like their life experience, like even like insights, even like ideas. We're open to
We are builders, so it's
Yeah,
like
we're
if you
builders,
have
so
anything, we can support it. So it's about yeah, we're builders.
and I think one of the first slides is like this project or this research is not about us, it's about the community that we're talking to. So it's taking our ego out of this design role and building all together. This is the main reason. So yeah, we need the community.
Clear. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for your research. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your clear presentation. Cherk, this was cool, right?
Thank you.
It was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything. Thank you.